A very warm welcome now properly to everybody who's joined us this evening at this very special event, a question and answer session with Holocaust survivor Agnes Kaposi. My name is Zoe Toft and I'm chair of a small charity called Folio, Sutton, Coldfield. And we're really delighted to be taking part in this year's Echo Eternal Horizons Festival. Echo Eternal is all about taking the testimony of Holocaust survivors and promoting a creative response and running events in response to their testimony to ensure echoes throughout time. So I'm going to be assisted this evening in conversation by Cathy O'Driscoll, a member of the Echo Eternal team. And behind the scenes, I'm very grateful for the support of Clara and Liz, who'll be making sure that everything runs smoothly, including the taking of questions. So after Agnes has introduced herself, Cathy and I will be doing a little bit of follow-up, asking her some questions, and then we'll be opening the floor to questions from all of you who have joined us this evening. So yes, I'm really delighted that you've all joined us this evening, and I'm extremely honoured and humbled to introduce to you Dr. Agnes Kaposi, who will now tell us a little bit about herself. Thank you, Agnes.
Thank you. Are we having some slides, please? Well, I want to just say to you who I am. Why should you be listening to me? I can't see you. You will be able to see me, and I want to just say a few things about myself. Some of it is obvious, like to the question, who am I? Please, the next slide. Zoe, maybe? That's right. The first answer is that I am a woman. It must be pretty obvious. I also have a name. That's my name, simply. And then the next one, a little bit more formally, and even more formally, after my name, there are some letters to describe the kind of background and education I have had. And yourself, you would have your own name, background, your skills. You might create a slide similar to this for yourselves. Let's have the next one. A bit more detail about me, the next slide. I'm a grandmother. Some of you might be grandparents. This clutch of grinning young people, they are the light of my life. They are my grandchildren, all 5 of them. Something more about me. I am an engineer, as you will see. The next slide is a good or not so good likeness. And the slide after that shows you the kind of work I have been doing as an engineer. I have worked in laboratories. I have taught at universities. And the next slide will show you I've written quite a few books on the subject of my engineering. I'm very pleased to show you the brown book that doesn't look very much. It's the one that cost me the most amount of work. That's my PhD over there. And the next slide after that, please, if we may have a look. Oops, the next slide. It gives you some more information about me. I was born in the little insignificant looking country right in the heart of Europe, Hungary, with about 9 million inhabitants, rather smaller than London in the number of people who are there. It's a turbulent place in the very heart of Europe, where many of the wars and the hardships have occurred over history. Well, if you show the next slide, please, Zoe, that will, oops, maybe see. It will give you also the information that I am British, although I was born in Hungary. I am British, and one more detail about me, that I am Jewish, although I was brought up without religion and I never had any call for religion, but it happens that I am Jewish. And one more slide, which tells you that in a book which appeared, no, Oh yes, okay. Let's stay with this for the moment. All of a sudden, near the end of the war, I suddenly stopped being any of those things. All the characteristics that a human being would be described by, their sex, their name, their background, their place of work, their nationality, all of that was taken away from me at one stroke, very near the end of the war. And all of that was replaced by a number. This identity card, which was given to us with just a number on it, is not mine. It belongs to a friend of mine. He preserved his. Mine was lost. I was 11 at the time when I became a number instead of being a person. I was at the instant when the card was issued to me, very ill, barely conscious. The card is lost and I don't remember my number. But that is just what it looked like. And the friend whose card this is lives about 10 miles down the road. Some of the details which I am telling you are going to be so unlikely. If you wanted ever to have some verification from somebody who went through those kinds of history that characterize my life, you could ask him. He would verify that what I am telling you is as near to the truth as I am able. Now, the whole story of my life is described in a book, which is in the next slide. If you would show it to us, please. It's entitled Yellow Star, Red Star. That picture on it is a picture of me. It appeared a year ago, and that tells you the whole of the story. The next slide will show you my life falls into three chapters, three distinct chapters. As a child, I was under the shadow of Nazism, and that can be symbolized by the yellow star, which we had to wear at a certain instant to set us aside from the rest of the population of the country where I was born. After the war, the country of my origin was dominated by a communist dictatorship characterized by the Red Star. And those were my teens and my student years. Under those, I lived behind the Iron Curtain. And properly, my free life as a person started in 1956 after my country went through a revolution, and that gave me a chance to escape. And as an adult, I have come to live in this country as symbolized by the Union Jack, as you see. So those are the three sections of my life. And all of that is described in my book, as I showed you before. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. And later on, I'll be putting a link, sending a link to your, so that you can find out a bit more about Agnes's book. I would warmly encourage all of you to find a copy and read it. It's a very powerful read, beautiful read, interesting read. And Folio will be donating, or has donated, 2 copies of the book actually to Sutton Coldfield Library. So if you're local to Sutton, once lockdown is lifted a little bit, you'll be able to borrow those from the library. But as I say, I'll share links so that if you're interested in purchasing a copy, you can do so. Now, Agnes, you've described very powerfully who you are. But this summary here of your experiences, you put it very simply, and I wonder whether we could explore it a little more and find out a bit more about what happened to you in each of these periods of your life that you outline here. So I'll invite Kathy now to explore a bit further with you one of these.
Hello, Agnes, and thank you for a really interesting introduction. And it is something that I know we want to know more about. I wonder if we could start with your early childhood, if you could tell us a little bit more about that, and perhaps whether there was any signs of increasing intolerance even then.
Well, I think that pictures might help. I always find when I talk to people, visual communication is effective. We are in the first section of my life, and there it is. You could say, here is a pretty baby, and that's me. I was born in 1932, only 3 months before Hitler came to power. And as you will see throughout my life, historical events punctuate my personal history. Let's get to the next slide. This is my family. That's me in the middle. I am about 4 on that picture. And my mom is next to me on one side and my granny the other, and my father behind me, a perfectly nice family. I was a pretty baby. They were a loving family. It augured well. But by that time, the situation was getting bad. My father was politically exposed. He was a socialist. Very soon after I was born, he lost his job and he was blacklisted, and he never really, throughout my childhood, properly became employable. My uncle, who is on that picture, and the husbands of my young aunts and all the young men of the family were professional men. They were, as professionals, prevented from working in their chosen field by anti-Jewish discriminatory laws. Show the next slide, please. Maybe? On the walls, in the newspapers, everywhere around, there were anti-Jewish propaganda posters, leaflets distributed. The ugly Jew in the corner had against him the caption, "Kill the Jew." The symbol as the Jew carrying a load of money on his shoulder, the symbol of the Jews, the dripping with jaws and being fat while the rest of the population is starving. All of that was promulgated in the country to incite hatred. It was difficult for me to understand. I was still preschool, and my father tried to explain to his preschool child why we were so hated, why we were identified with these kinds of adverse images. Those pictures of Jews didn't look like members of my family. Show the next slide, please. Here are my young uncles, some of them, as I mentioned to you. They were a lawyer, a doctor, a banker, a civil engineer, an artist. My uncle over there in the bottom left-hand corner was the only man in my family who had a camera. When he was killed together with all the others in course of the war, thereafter, photographic recording in the family more or less stopped because he was the only one who had a camera. They were, in fact, my young uncles. They were my playmates when I was young because they were unemployed. They had time for me. They had no children of their own. For 8 years, I was the only child in the whole extended family. I had no playmates because a Jewish child was not allowed to play with by the Gentile children in the district. But I was not lonely because they were surrounding me, loved me, and told me about their professions. So I had quite a rich childhood in the presence of these young men who were then all sucked into the army to fight on Hitler's side and were murdered by members of the same army, members of their own country. So by the time I started school and by the time the war got started, these people who had populated my childhood and made my childhood happy had disappeared and never returned from the war. Next picture, please. Hungary went into war on Hitler's side. That picture shows Hitler himself, and next to him, the head of state. Next picture, please. And here is me on the left, being of school age, all bright and ready to learn. I loved learning. I was looking forward to school. I still love learning. But by the time I was 10 or 11, I had enough abuse from my fellow schoolmates and even from my teacher. And you can read that there was quite a bit of pain connected to my childhood by the time I was 10, which is the right-hand picture on there in front of you. I think that is the end of this sequence, isn't it, more or less?
So thank you, Agnes. It's well, it's shocking really to hear about how already from a very early age your family was experiencing discrimination, and how that became only stronger as the war approached. Could you tell us a little bit now about what happened to you under the Nazi rule during the Second World War, please?
I should like some more pictures to tell the story. We are still in the period of the war now raging, and this is Hungary went into the war on Hitler's side in 1941. The situation got even worse in 1944 when the German army occupied Hungary. Now, this is an extraordinary thing, historically speaking, because Hungary was fighting the war on Hitler's side. And all of a sudden, the German army appeared marching on the streets, occupying an allied country. The force which descended into Hungary was not large. There were about 200 German people assigned the job of getting rid of the Jews of Hungary. There were nearly 750,000 Jewish people living in Hungary, half of them, 500,000 in the provinces and 250,000 in the capital city. Well, how could 200 Germans get rid of 750,000 Jews at the time when Germany was already losing the war? This was nearing the end of the war. The Nazis were being beaten, but their last minute effort was to get rid of these Jews. And in fact, they managed in less than 3 months to murder over 500,000 Jews, taking them to Auschwitz. Well, they could only do that with the collaboration of the Hungarian gendarmerie. On the right-hand picture, in front of you, you see the Hungarian gendarmes in their smart uniform. It was they who did most of the deed of getting rid of Hungary's Jews under the guidance of the German small group of a couple of hundred. What happened was that in March, the German army occupied the country. Ghettos were set up. May we have the next slide? Please. Yes, this is an interesting picture which is contemporary. It is now. They set up here in the heart of Budapest, in one of the foremost squares of the city. They set up a big ugly monument in the background, which is displaying Hungary as a victim of German Nazism instead of what they truly were, perpetrators of the Nazi crimes of the war. In front of it are if you like, the manifestations of the commons of the country themselves. They brought forth pictures and letters and broken artifacts, even a poster there. The poster in red, translated, means history falsification and the killing of the spirit of the country. That is what that poster says. This is the current situation of a hypocritical country, which denies responsibility rather than facing up to the events of their past. As I had shown you what those gendarmes did, how the Hungarians cooperated in the killing of their Jews. Maybe see the next slide. Here is part of the rules that they brought in, the wearing of the yellow stars. This is a historical document. These boys are, I don't know them. They happen just to be Jewish children wearing the yellow star, which became compulsory to be worn soon after the German occupation in March 1944. Next one, please. Here is my native city. That wall across the street is in fact the wall of the ghetto. The buildings which were falling within the ghetto, all the windows and doorways were blocked up or bricked up or otherwise made unpassable. A ghetto was totally sealed, more tightly than any prison. Nobody in, nobody out. My grandmother's home happened at a little two-room home, fell within the area of the ghetto, but the rest of the extended family lived outside of the ghetto area. They were then forced into the ghetto itself, and 13 members of the extended family lived during the ghetto time in my grandmother's two-roomed home. If you show the next slide, there were 2 toddlers among the members of our extended family. My little cousin Eva was 2. Little cousin George was 3 years old at the time. George's mother Clara survived, as did Eva and George. My aunt Mary, who is on the right-hand side of the bottom picture, was among those who were killed in Auschwitz. She never survived. But at least you see 3 of the members of the extended family here who were in the ghetto, and what happened next, we shared. Show the next slide, please. The ghetto was cleared after only a few weeks. The deportation trains started. They were wagons such as this. Our wagon had 87 people traveling in it in the height of the summer for 5 nights and 4 days, without food, without water, and without sanitation. In my book, I describe somewhat what that journey was like. And in spite of the horror of that journey, we were the lucky ones. If you show the picture after this, please. This is an artist's impression of people being pushed into those wagons. There are no photographs that I could find, but this artist's impression is consistent with what I remember. The next picture, please. Now, this is the map of Hungary. The majority of the provincial Jewry of the country was taken to Auschwitz, nearly 500,000 people traveling northwards. There were 15,000 people, only 15,000 out of 500,000, who finished up near Vienna. The green lines show those few trains which went directly from those 3 provincial cities to Vienna. And ours was uniquely a train which was heading for Auschwitz, northwards, and then diverted after 2 days. And we also fetched up in Vienna. It's a quirk of history. I have investigated it, and I consulted historians. In the book, it is described how it happened that our journey did not end up in Auschwitz, but we were among the 15,000 as opposed to 500,000. Had we been on that train, continuing up to Auschwitz, my little cousins, whom you have met in the slide before, and I, and my grandmother and others, would have had the same fate as the 500,000. Few of them survived. Maybe have to go to the next slide. Once we were in Austria, we were put to work. There was a shortage of labor. Germany was losing the war. The fields were standing there with the crops rotting. We were put to work. We lied about my age. I was 11, and you had to be 14 before you counted to be old enough to work. We lied that I was 14 because only those that worked were given any food. And even those that were given food were starving. And in our extended family, there were those toddlers, and there were 3 grannies who were either too young or too old to work. And just to have another food ration, we said I was 14, so I worked with the adults. The work was extremely, extremely hard. We worked from before sunup to past sundown. We groped to the field in the dark so that the sun was starting to come up when we started working, and we worked until the light faded or practically went away. The worst job of all was to dig sugar beet out of the frozen ground. Those are not my hands, those are frozen hands. My hands look just like that. And even now in Britain's moderate climate, the frostbite sometimes renews itself if the weather persists to be cold. The next slide, please. When agricultural work couldn't carry on anymore because the winter had come, then we were put to work on making anti-aircraft guns for the Luftwaffe, for the Hungarian army, and that is the very gun on which I worked at that time. And in my book, I describe what job. By then, I had just turned 12. What can a 12-year-old do to make an anti-aircraft gun? If you want to have the answer, you can read about it or ask me. Go on, please. The factory where we worked was, next slide. The factory was the target of bombing. Bombing went on all the time. It's a near miracle that our barracks where we stayed were not bombed. There was a firebomb at one point, but our building was not destroyed. Most of Vienna was. This is a famous photograph of the way Vienna looked like. And when the factory was no longer functioning because it had been bombed, then they were commandeering us to clear bomb damage in Vienna. By then we were skeletal Jews with a wheelbarrow and a shovel trying to clear bomb damage. It was a wasted effort. The bombing gained on us. That period soon came to an end, so they decided to get rid of us. The last part of our story was when, I don't describe it here, I shall tell you about this map in just one moment. The Jews from the vicinity of Vienna on the left-hand side were taken northwards towards Theresienstadt, and most of them never returned. Our train was also to go, and the railway line was bombed, one of those miracles that allows me to come and tell you my story to you. The train the day before disappeared to Theresienstadt. Our train couldn't go because of a bomb raid. And soon after that, the war was finished, the Soviet army came to liberate our camp. Rampaging Soviet army is not one that you would like to meet, especially not if you are a young woman. This map describes the full journey that we had. Budapest in the center, which is where we had originally lived. We traveled to Debrecen to join my grandmother in her home, like I described, where the extended family gathered. Then our train going northwards, as you have seen, towards Auschwitz and diverted to Vienna. Then near Vienna, where we were liberated when the war was over. And then we found our way back to Budapest. Now, there were no trains, there was no transportation, we were skeletons, we were starved, we were weak. It took us a month, 1 month of a journey of about 150 miles from near Vienna on the left to back to Budapest in the center of Hungary. Why did we go back? We had been so badly treated by our native country. Why did we go back? Well, for two reasons. Mostly because we thought we shall meet up with our men. We didn't realize that our young men were all dead by then. And also because we thought we might find our home once again. We didn't realize that in Budapest, our home had been taken away from us, and we never really recovered our possession or our home. It was quite a problem to re-enter Hungarian society when the war was over. But anyhow, that is the story of my, if you like, Nazi period under the Yellow Star. So
thank you, Agnes. You've told us so much, and there's a swathe of things there that I'm sure lots of people listening will have questions for. And I'd remind you as an audience to put in your questions into the question and answer section, because in about 10, 15 minutes, we're going to look at those questions and pose those to Agnes. I mean, what strikes me, Agnes, is that sort of the level and range of hardship and risk that you faced as a result of discrimination and hate, and the level of loss. But also that sense of, you mentioned it as a quirk of history, that sense of luck, coincidence that resulted in you and the members of your family surviving. So I'd like to sort of move on to the next section, and then I'm sure we'll come back to sort of ask you more questions. So you survived, you're then heading back to Hungary. It'd be really interesting to hear, what was your experience about when you went back to Hungary as a student and living under as a student under Hungary?
Now comes the Red Star period. Maybe I should just, in conclusion, say that out of the 13 members of my extended family, only 11 survived, and those were the women and the children. The young men I mentioned had been killed already. So I would say about half, more than half of my family was lost. Well, here we are going now back to Budapest. We are arriving back in Budapest. Next slide, please. Maybe? This is beautiful Budapest. There are lots of tourist trips inviting you to travel to Budapest. There is the Blue Danube and the Chain Bridge and the Royal Castle on the other side on the hill. This is what the tourist literature describes Budapest to be. And this is how we remembered Budapest to be before we were taken into our camps. Instead, what we found was this. This is exactly the same picture, the bridge down, rubble on the streets, and corpses of horses, and rats the size of cats, and disease and famine. That is Budapest 1945. The next slide, if you please. There was rampant, destructive, what's the word?
Inflation.
Inflation. That's right. Thank you. Those pictures are 100 million units of penge of Hungarian currency. They are in fact bills, banknotes, which I have. I took that picture of some of the banknotes which I have on my shelf. On the right-hand side is a historical photograph of somebody sweeping up the worthless banknotes, in fact, worth not even the paper they were written on. There was hardship. Stability came in the form of, I had to tell you, when I was 12, I met this young man. He was 16 at the time. We met only a few months after we returned back from the camps. He did have slanty eyes and curly eyelashes, and there you are. It was difficult to resist him, and I didn't. At the age of 19, I married him. And as I've mentioned to you perhaps before, the first time he ever caused me any pain was when he died 8 years ago. He was a sweet and lovely and such a fantastic companion to my whole life, as this picture implies. Go on, please. Here is communism. The red star was everywhere. We were deprived even of the freedom of thought. We had no choice in any matter. I became an engineer. I'm glad I did, but not because of my choice, because I was told that this was what I am to do. It was a dictatorship. We had to march. We had to sing songs which were the ones to be sung. I could be one of those over there. We had to march because it was the anniversary of the Great October Revolution. Oh, yeah. Don't take that picture away for a moment. The Great October Revolution of the Soviet Union. We had to march. We had to march because it was Stalin's birthday. This was a kind of life that you would find hard to imagine. And I do urge you to read about it in my book, because I make sure that it is described. It's not a Holocaust story, but it's a story of how you live under tyranny without freedom. Now, this is one of the main streets of Hungary, and that statue is the statue of Stalin. You can imagine how huge it was, because all those little figures down below, by comparison, show it to you. It became also the symbol of hatred. And when the revolution in 1956 finally broke out, one of the first acts of the mob was to demolish the statue. May we have the picture? The next slide, please. Oh, yeah, I got married in 1952. This is my marriage to the young man you met before. And in 1956, two things happened. First, as I told you, that was the revolution. But even before then, I got a degree. Here is my degree certificate. Now, everything was done by the Hungarian state, by the state. Even the degree certificate was awarded by the state. That symbol on the left-hand side on my degree certificate is that of the state. A university had no autonomy, no decision. My degree I obtained with distinction. Zoe knows Hungarian. She could translate. It says on the right-hand side that it is a degree with distinction. That's why it's red. The color red was a symbol. The ordinary mortals had black degrees like this. Mine was a red one. It didn't do me much good. Nothing did any good to anybody in a regime such as that. Well, go on to the next.
Agnes, I see the slides have got a bit mixed up here. These refer back to the earlier ones. So I don't know if you want to just describe what we're seeing here.
Well, here is Stalin's statue, as I told you, already dragged down by the revolution. And if you flick through these pictures, then some of these photographs of the revolution, here is Stalin's head, some of these pictures were taken by my husband. And the next, please.
Can you see the one of Neptynhausen?
Yeah. This is the corner of my mother's street. Picture taken by my husband. This is also, these are all pictures of Budapest during the 1956 revolution. Go on. This is my husband's school. The woman with the headscarf over there is me. So these are really proper, authentic pictures what a revolution was like. Well, the chance that this gave us was to flee the country, and we did. Never to look back. I want to emphasize to you, I was born in Hungary. The country rejected me and my family because we were Jews, although we never committed any act against the state or anybody else. We all worked hard. I did, and so did all my family. Nevertheless, all we received was rejection and hatred and discrimination. I turned my back to it, and I never regretted it.
Now, Agnes, we were going to ask you a little bit more about what came next and how you got to the UK, having described how painful it must have been to be rejected by the country where you were born. But I'm mindful of the time, and it's nearly 6:15, and I'm very keen to invite questions from our audience that have joined us this evening, and questions have been coming through. Please feel free to continue to submit questions, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. So the first question I'm going to take is from Alison, and Alison says, your story is devastating. How have you been affected? Did you find strength, or was it already there? She's got a few more questions, but I think I'll start there because I think that might be quite a challenging one to answer. Did you find strength?
I have been thinking about this. There are different sources of strength. Some people can find strength, for example, in their faith. And since in my family there never was any commitment to religion, that was not a source of strength available to me. There was a source of strength in the family link, in the way in which I noticed that any member of my family would do anything to help me, and I felt the same way. I was committed to helping all members of my family, and in particular, I found inspiration from saving those two babies, those two little ones that I showed the picture of. They were so beautiful, so innocent. And I knew I was conscious and aware of the responsibility I had to try to save them. That was a source of strength.
Thank you, Agnes. And Alison would also like to say thank you for sharing your experience in your life with us. She really appreciates that. Lorraine's got a question, which was, were there any reprisals on the Hungarian gendarmes after the war? Here's a question I know that we've talked a lot about. Have you forgiven your oppressors?
Well, these are two very difficult questions, and the answer to the first is practically no. There were no reprisals. There were reprisals of a very, very few of the extreme cases, but the whole history of how the perpetrators, the Hungarian, the perpetrators of these outrages, how they were treated subsequently, is in fact a shame on humanity. There were one or two, like Eichmann, who was in charge of the destruction of Europe's Jews. He was in due course hunted down in South America, and he was put to trial and he was killed. But small criminals, not at all. And my father could even later on remember individuals wearing the communist secret police uniform, whom he remembered wearing the Hungarian Arrow Cross uniform, which was the Hungarian Nazi uniform, the very same individual whom he knew. No, there was no possibility. There's a big question which you are not asking, and I would talk about it another time, the way in which the population of the country reacted to one and the other tyranny, how they acted during the Nazi time and how they behaved in the communist time. There was a big difference, and that's very interesting. The more important question is forgiveness, and I have been working on that. And I have even been questioned. I was first questioned about it by members of a Catholic school. And they asked whether I forgave those that committed those acts against me and my family. And my answer was, it might have been easier for a Christian to forgive because they might have been taught to forgive those that trespass against them, to turn the other cheek, whatever. In my case, there was no religion. I had no means of forgiving from a religious base. And yet I very soon discovered that to allow hatred and anger to stay with me was destructive, not of those who committed the sins against me and mine, but it was destroying me. I had to find a way of reconciling myself with those things that had happened, because that was the only way to become, to be sane and to be whole. My way of teaching myself how to forgive was to try to understand from the point of view of the perpetrators what might have motivated them to behave as they did. I could give you examples, there is no time now. I could give you examples where I could understand that there was a problem. And that problem made them turn against the Jews and behave in the way they did. The problem was understandable. There was logic to the problem. The solution was so cruel, so vicious. The solution couldn't be condoned. But by understanding the problem, at least, I went a little way towards forgiveness. I must give you one example here. The country was against the Soviet Union in war. They had already put into action 40 different laws depriving the Jews of all their civil rights. Then the country was going to war. What to do with the Jews? Shall we give them arms, put them in uniform, and put them on the front to fight against the Soviets with Hitler? What if they turn against their own country? What if they side with the enemies? So that was no good. You can't put the Jews with arms into the army. So what do you do with them? Do you leave them back in the country to stay in their families while the rest of the population was fighting and dying in the Russian winter, fighting against the Soviets? Do you see the problem was there? The solution should not have been to put these Jews out in the front without uniform, with the express instruction to the army, don't let them come back. that was not the answer. It wasn't the answer to march a bank of Jews through the minefield to get rid of both the mines and the Jews. That was not the answer. But at least you understood that they had a problem, if you follow me. So I tried to approach forgiveness by understanding. And I can tell you, I think I must have achieved a good measure of forgiveness. I have no hate.
That's remarkable, Agnes, and it's inspiration for us all, I think. And I think it also probably answers, Claire's got a question, do you consider forgiveness, hard as it must be, to be a matter of self-preservation? And I think
yes, it's selfish to forgive, as well as it's humane. And it explains to you why I'm talking to you right now. I don't think that you should study the Holocaust or any such merely as a horror story. This is not to titivate. It's not like going to see a horror movie. It's not even to hear an interesting story. It's much more than that. You have to take history as the basis of the past should teach you a lesson for the future. You have to ask yourself, in what way can I contribute for the future such that it doesn't happen again? That's why I am doing what I am doing. I am trying to tell each one, and I even asked 11-year-old youngsters, you have to do something. If you listen to me and if you are touched by what I'm saying, you have to ask yourself, what can you do to make sure that we have a better world in the future than we had in the past? Quite interesting answers come back.
Yes, I would love to open it out to the floor to all our audience to think about their own answers to that question that you've put to us, Agnes.
What can you do?
What can I do? Well, I'm trying.
Well, each one of you. I must tell you, in one case, an 11-year-old class said to me, what can we do? What are you doing? And I say, I am talking to you. And then a little one chimed up, aged 11. He said, do you mean we should tell our parents? And the answer was, yes, go and tell your parents. Now, don't you think that's wonderful?
That's wonderful, Agnes. And in fact, it fits perfectly with the sort of where we've got to in this session, and also why we were so eager for you to speak today and to link with a Folio, because it underpins the work of what we're doing at Echo Eternal and the Horizons Festival this year, which is basically remembering and focusing on a range of survivors around Holocaust Memorial Day for the next 22 days left now. But also it's about young people, community groups, people who come to these testimonies, making a pledge to do something in response to the testimony.
That's right.
Learn about the testimony, learn about the Holocaust, but actually then act to support their community, to share the testimony, and to move things forward, to move forward.
That's right.
Very definitely.
Yes. We've got just a few more minutes though, and I'm very keen. I mean, in a way, this would be a perfect place to wrap up. But I know that there are a couple more questions, and people are really moved by your story, Agnes. And for so many people, this will be the first chance that they get to talk with somebody who survived the Holocaust and to learn from them. So I have a question from Sandra, who says, your story of resilience is amazing. She doesn't say it, but I'm sure, like me, she's quite inspired by your resilience. How on earth did you and your family survive during the period when you got back to Budapest and you found you had no home?
Well, that was very difficult. One of the reasons why was because every member of my family, those that survived, every member of my family was damaged. My father was not the same man. He was mentally damaged. My mother was physically damaged. She was, how old was she? She was 34, my mother, when we arrived back in Budapest. So she was still a relatively young woman. Her spine was injured because of the hard work that we had done. She was gradually crippled. She had to have a spinal operation, which was meant to be life-threatening, and later on it had to be repeated again here in Britain. We were told that we couldn't have our home back because it had been allocated to a family that had been bombed out of their own home. They were defeated people. We had no quarrel with them, but there were 11 of us still left. And we had a little 2-roomed flat, and their family was 6 and ours 11, and we all crowded into the same little 2-roomed flat, which used to be ours. We tried to find our way out of it. Somebody said, we lived in the center of the city, as you would read in my book. Somebody said in the northernmost nearby town, there are some empty homes to be had. We applied for allocation of that home, of a home in this other town called Budapest. Nobody told us why there were some empty homes there. Later we discovered because there had been 20,000 Jews in that little town, and they were all murdered in Auschwitz. Among them, my Aunt Mary, whose pictures you had seen before. Because she had once lived in that little town, we were able to apply for an allocation of a home. What a home looks like after the Soviet army had been there, I describe in my book. They barbecued, they set fires into the parquet flooring. They didn't understand about the toilet, but they found the bathtub instead. I mean, you can't imagine. But in due course, we found that we cleaned up a place, and we had no furniture. Somebody said that there is sometimes some soup being distributed around the corner. So off I went to find a bowl of soup. We had nothing, and we had to build from nothing. With my father in the state from which he never recovered. My mother, as I told you, and I had to go to school. My father's priority was I had to go to school. Learning was the topmost priority. It was interesting. May I ask you to jot down, if possible, some of the questions that are urgent, together with the address, the email address of the questioner, and I will do my best to reply.
I think that's ever so generous of you, Agnes. And
well, it's important. If people want to take forward what I had to tell them, and if they think that having their questions answered might strengthen them in their resolve, then of course I have to try to answer.
Thank you, Agnes. We'll make sure that the questions that have been submitted that we haven't had time to reach come to you, and that a connection is facilitated so that you can reply to them. So we've ended on a note of generosity that has, for me, epitomized everything I've come to know about you, Agnes. I continue to be, every time I hear your story, I'm moved and inspired and strengthened. And
thank you.
I feel very grateful for the opportunity to enable other people to hear your stories, and to enable other people, as you've reminded us all, to go away and reflect on what each of us can do, inspired by your story and your experiences, to share it, to encourage people to stand up for hatred and intolerance, whenever they see it. So thank you, Agnes. Once again, a real heartfelt thank you, Agnes. And thank you all for joining us this evening. I wish you all a very good evening. I hope you all stay safe and stay well. And thank you. Goodbye.
Stay well. Thank you.